You really expect me to believe a man like you has business anywhere near my executive offices today?
I'm not asking for permission, and I'm not here to waste anyone's time.
Then explain why you walked into my building carrying a worn folder full of impossible stories.
This folder contains documents tied to this company's history, and you should look at them carefully.
The lobby fell silent as Sterling's order echoed across the marble floor. Solomon held the folder close as security closed in. What Sterling Harrow didn't know was that the old man he was throwing into the rain had founded the company, whose name was printed above the doors. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The morning rain hammered the glass walls of Archer Meridian Technologies like bullets against armor. Solomon Archer stepped off the city bus, his weathered hands gripping a leather folder tight against his chest. Water streamed down his dark green work shirt. His old slacks clung to his legs. His shoes squelched with every step toward the towering headquarters. The building rose 40 stories into the gray sky. Chrome and glass twisted upward like a steel monument to power. Solomon had seen this place built from nothing. He had watched every floor take shape, every beam, every wire, every security camera that now tracked his approach. The company sign stretched across the entrance in bold silver letters. Archer Meridian Technologies. Solomon paused beneath it. Rain soaked his gray hair. His eyes traced each letter like a man reading his own tombstone. The name Archer belonged to him, had always belonged to him, but the world had forgotten. He pushed through the revolving doors. The lobby exploded with warmth and light. Marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Executive assistants clicked across the space in expensive heels. Men in $1,000 suits clustered around coffee stations, checking phones, laughing at private jokes. The air smelled like leather and success. Solomon dripped water onto the pristine floor. His folder left small puddles where he held it, but he walked forward with quiet purpose, his back straight, his steps measured and calm. "Excuse me, sir." The receptionist's voice cut through the morning bustle. She was young, blonde, polished like everything else in the building. Her smile was practiced and cold. "Can I help you?" "I need to see Sterling Harrow," Solomon said. His voice was steady, clear. "The CEO." The woman's smile froze. Her eyes swept over his wet clothes, his worn shoes, his dark skin, his age. "Do you have an appointment?" "I don't need one." "Sir, Mr. Harrow is preparing for our anniversary celebration this morning. He's meeting with federal contract officers and major donors. I'm sure you understand." "I understand more than you think." Security appeared like shadows. 2 guards in navy blazers moved closer. Their hands rested near their radios. They had the look of men who threw people out for a living. "Is there a problem here?" The older guard spoke without looking at Solomon directly. He addressed the receptionist instead, like Solomon wasn't worth acknowledging. "This gentleman would like to see Mr. Harrow," she said. The word gentleman dripped with sarcasm. More executives noticed the commotion. Conversations slowed. Heads turned. Solomon felt their stares like heat on his back. These people saw his wet clothes and decided everything they needed to know about him. "Sir, you need to leave." The younger guard stepped forward. "This is a private corporate facility." Solomon didn't move. "I built this place." The guards exchanged glances. Someone laughed from across the lobby. The sound echoed off the marble like a slap. "Look, old man," the older guard said. His voice dropped low and threatening. "We don't want trouble. But you can't just walk in here making crazy claims. This building belongs to important people. It belongs to me." The laughter spread. More executives gathered to watch the show. They pulled out phones to record the crazy old man who thought he owned their company. Their amusement was sharp and cruel. Then Sterling Harrow appeared. He moved through the crowd like a king among servants. 54 years old with silver hair and a suit that cost more than most people made in months. His smile was television perfect. His eyes were ice cold. Behind him walked men in expensive overcoats, federal contract officers, and board members who controlled billions of dollars. Sterling saw the crowd, saw the cameras, saw an opportunity to show his power. He walked toward Solomon with a cold smile spreading across his face. The lobby, Sterling said loud enough for everyone to hear, "is not for men who wander in from the street." Solomon looked up at Sterling without flinching. The CEO stood there in his perfect suit, surrounded by his perfect people, waiting for the old man to crumble under the weight of his stare. "I have business with this company's history," Solomon said quietly. Sterling laughed. The sound echoed off the marble walls like breaking glass. "Business? Look at yourself, old man. You're dripping on marble that costs more than you make in a year." The donors shifted uncomfortably. Phones stayed up, recording every word. The receptionist watched with wide eyes from behind her desk. Security guards positioned themselves like they were preparing for war. "Men like you," Sterling continued, his voice rising for the cameras, "come through the service entrance, not the executive lobby." He gestured toward Solomon's soaked clothes. "This building isn't a shelter just because it's raining." Solomon's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. "I'm not looking for shelter." "Then what? Money?" Sterling stepped closer, invading Solomon's space. "You see success and think you can walk in here with some sob story? Some claim about knowing the company history?" He turned to address the crowd behind him. "These people think rich folks owe them something just for existing." A woman in pearls nodded. A man in a gold watch whispered to his friend. They looked at Solomon like he was a disease they might catch. "Sir," Solomon said, his voice carrying decades of dignity, "if you'd just look at these documents." He lifted the leather folder slightly. Sterling's eyes locked onto it like a hawk spotting prey. "What's in there?" Sterling demanded. "Some fake papers? Some made-up story about how you built this company?" His voice dripped with contempt. "Hand it over." Solomon pulled the folder closer to his chest. "These documents stay with me. Not a chance." Sterling reached for the folder. Solomon stepped back. "Don't." The word hung in the air like a challenge. The lobby went dead quiet, except for the rain hammering the glass walls outside. Security guards tensed. Donors whispered. Cameras kept recording. Sterling's face turned red. His perfect composure cracked. "You dare tell me what to do in my building?" He shoved Solomon hard in the chest. The old man stumbled backward, his shoes slipping on the wet marble. The leather folder pressed against his ribs as he fought to keep his balance. "Get out!" Sterling shouted. "Get out, before I have you arrested for trespassing." Solomon straightened himself slowly. Water dripped from his coat onto the floor. "I'm not leaving until—" Sterling grabbed Solomon by the shoulders and pushed him toward the revolving doors. The crowd gasped. The receptionist covered her mouth. Security guards looked at each other, unsure whether to stop their CEO or help him. "You want to play games?" Sterling snarled. "Here's your game." He spun Solomon around and kicked him hard in the back. The blow sent the old man stumbling through the revolving door and out into the storm. Solomon's feet tangled. His balance gave way. He hit the wet pavement hard, rolling toward the curb as rain soaked through his clothes. The leather folder scattered across the sidewalk. Papers threatened to blow away in the wind. Solomon scrambled to gather them, his knees scraping against concrete, his dignity shattered in full view of the glass lobby. Inside, the crowd stood frozen behind the windows. Some looked shocked, others looked satisfied. All of them stared at the old man picking up soggy documents in the rain like he was entertainment. Sterling straightened his tie and smoothed his perfect hair. He turned to the security chief with cold authority. "Lock those doors! That man doesn't come back inside." The guard nodded and moved toward the entrance controls. Above them, the lobby's security cameras recorded every second of what just happened. Amelia Rhodes pressed her face against the third-floor window. Rain streaked down the glass like tears. Below in the entrance courtyard, the old man sat hunched under the narrow awning. His dark clothes were soaked through. His gray hair dripped water onto the concrete. He wasn't crying. He wasn't shouting. He just sat there, protecting that leather folder like it held his entire life. "Did you see what Sterling did?" whispered Janet from the next desk. "Saw it on the lobby monitor," Amelia said. Her stomach felt sick. "That was wrong. Guy probably deserved it," said Marcus from accounting. "You don't just walk into executive spaces looking like that." Amelia turned away from the window. She couldn't shake the image of Sterling's kick, the way the old man had fallen, the way he'd scrambled to save his papers, while rich people watched like it was a show. She walked back to her records terminal. Her job was simple: scan old documents, update digital files, fix broken links in the company database, junior analyst work. Nothing important enough to make waves. But something about the old man bothered her. The way he'd spoken, the confidence in his voice when he'd said he had business with the company's history. Most homeless people asked for money or food. This man had asked for the CEO. Amelia's fingers moved across the keyboard before she realized what she was doing. She opened the incorporation database, the really old files from the 1970s. Most of them were barely readable scans of paper documents that someone had digitized years ago. She typed, Solomon Archer. The search wheel spun. Her heart pounded for no reason she could name. This was probably nothing. The old man was probably confused, or lying, or both. The screen flickered. A single result appeared. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. There it was, a faded incorporation document from 1974. Archer Meridian Technologies, the founding charter that created the company she worked for every day. And right there at the top of the founder list, in clear black letters, Solomon Archer, principal founder and systems designer. Oh my God, she whispered. Her hands shook as she read the document again. Solomon Archer wasn't just listed as a founder, he was listed as the first founder, the principal founder, above all the other names she recognized from company history. She printed the document with trembling fingers. The paper was still warm when she grabbed it and ran for the elevator. The lobby was quieter now. The donors had moved to conference rooms. Security guards stood by the locked entrance doors. Outside, Solomon still sat under the awning, motionless, except for the rise and fall of his breathing. Amelia grabbed an umbrella from the reception desk and pushed through the side door into the rain. Her shoes splashed through puddles as she ran toward the entrance courtyard. "Sir," she called out. "Sir, wait!" Solomon looked up. His eyes were calm, not angry or broken like she'd expected, just patient, like he'd been waiting for something. "Are you Solomon Archer?" she asked, holding the umbrella over both of them. "I am." She showed him the printout, the incorporation document, his name at the top of the founder list. Solomon studied the paper for a long moment. Then he looked at her with something that might have been a smile. "You found page 1, he said quietly. "Now wait until you see what they did to page 2. Amelia stared at him. "This says you founded the company." "It does." "Then why did he kick you out?" Solomon carefully placed a small brass key inside his leather folder, protecting it from the rain that drummed against the umbrella. "Because Sterling Harrow doesn't know who I am," he said, "and Grant Vale is hoping to keep it that way." Amelia's mind raced. This was impossible. The old man Sterling had humiliated and assaulted was the company's founder? The man who built Archer Meridian Technologies? "This is a mistake," she said, more to herself than to Solomon. "This has to be a mistake. When I show Sterling this document, he'll fix everything?" Solomon's voice carried decades of bitter experience. "He'll apologize and invite me back inside?" "Yes, of course. The company wouldn't." "Child," Solomon said gently, "you have good intentions. But Sterling Harrow knew exactly who I was when he kicked me into this rain." Amelia clutched the printout tighter. That couldn't be true. Companies made mistakes, but they fixed them when presented with evidence, especially evidence this clear. She had to show Sterling immediately. This was all just a terrible misunderstanding. Amelia's heels clicked against the marble floor as she hurried toward the executive conference room. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The incorporation document felt like it was burning through her fingers. This would fix everything. Sterling would see the proof, realize his mistake, and bring Solomon back inside. Maybe there would be an apology, maybe even a celebration. The company's original founder, returning for the anniversary. She knocked on the heavy oak door and pushed it open without waiting for permission. The conference room buzzed with controlled energy. Sterling stood at the head of a massive table, pointing at presentation slides on wall-mounted screens. Senior lawyers in expensive suits shuffled through thick folders. Corporate communications staff typed frantically on laptops. And at Sterling's right hand sat an older man Amelia recognized, but had never spoken to, Grant Vale, the board chairman. 72 years old, silver-haired, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than Amelia made in 3 months. His pale blue eyes swept the room like a hawk, watching for prey. "Mr. Harrow," Amelia called out, her voice higher than she intended. "Sir, I need to show you something important." Sterling looked up with irritation. "Rhodes, we're preparing the anniversary announcement. Whatever this is, it's about the man you removed from the lobby," she said, stepping forward with the document. "Solomon Archer. I found something in the records." The room went silent. Grant Vale's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. His face drained of all color, turning almost gray. The cup trembled in his hand before he carefully set it down on the table. "What kind of something?" Sterling asked, his voice sharp with suspicion. Amelia placed the incorporation document on the table. "He's listed as the principal founder of Archer Meridian Technologies. From 1974, this is his company." The lawyers leaned forward to examine the paper. One of them whistled low under his breath. Another pulled out his phone to take a picture. Grant Vale stared at the document like it was a poisonous snake. His jaw worked silently for several seconds before words came out. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice deadly quiet. "In the incorporation database. I just searched his name and—" "You searched confidential company records without authorization?" Grant's voice cut through the air like a blade. "You accessed restricted historical files?" Amelia stepped back, confused by his anger. I work in records analysis. It's public incorporation data. Nothing about this company's founding is public." Grant slammed his palm on the table, making everyone jump. "Those files are classified corporate history." Sterling looked between the document and Grant's rage, clearly lost. "Grant, what's—" "The old man is a fraud," Grant said, his voice rising to a shout. "A con artist targeting our anniversary for publicity. He probably planted fake documents in our system months ago." One of the lawyers cleared his throat. "Sir, this appears to be an original scan from state incorporation records." "I don't care what it appears to be." Grant's face flushed red above his expensive collar. "Solomon Archer is not, has never been, and will never be associated with this company." The room fell silent again. Amelia felt like she'd stepped into a nightmare. Grant Vale's reaction made no sense. If Solomon was a fraud, why was the chairman so terrified? "Grant," Sterling said carefully, "maybe we should verify—" "There's nothing to verify." Grant stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "Sterling, I want you to call security immediately. Have them file trespassing charges against this opportunist. Then call our media team. We need a statement ready in 1 hour." "What kind of statement?" Sterling asked. Grant's eyes blazed with cold fury. "That a confused old man attempted to exploit our anniversary celebration by claiming false founder status. That he became aggressive when confronted. That he was removed from the property for everyone's safety." Amelia's stomach dropped. "But that's not what happened. He wasn't aggressive. You kicked him." "Ms. Rhodes," Grant said, his voice dripping with menace, "you are dangerously close to losing your job. I suggest you return to your desk and forget you ever saw that document." "I can't forget what I saw." "Then maybe you shouldn't work here anymore." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Amelia looked around the room, hoping someone would defend the truth. The lawyers studied their folders. The communications staff pretended to type. Sterling shifted uncomfortably, but said nothing. Grant turned back to Sterling with military precision. "I want the lobby security footage reviewed immediately. Make sure it shows the incident from the proper angle, the angle that protects this company." Sterling nodded slowly. "You want me to edit the footage?" "I want you to ensure the footage tells the correct story," Grant said. "The story where an unstable trespasser was safely removed after becoming a threat to our employees and guests." Amelia watched in horror as Sterling reached for his phone. He was actually going to do it. "Edit the security cameras. Erase the evidence of what really happened." "Sir," she said desperately, "the footage shows you kicking an elderly man into the rain. People saw it happen. You can't just—" "I can do whatever is necessary to protect this company," Sterling said, dialing security. "And right now, that means making sure nobody outside these walls ever sees that footage." The rain had not stopped. If anything, it fell harder now, drumming against the glass lobby like angry fingers. Solomon Archer sat beneath the narrow awning outside Archer Meridian Technologies, his dark green shirt still soaked through, his old leather folder pressed against his chest like armor. He watched the police cruisers pull up through the sheets of rain. 2 officers stepped out, adjusting their hats against the weather. They moved with the careful authority of men who had been told this was a simple trespassing case. Nothing complicated, just an old man who did not belong. Inside the lobby, Sterling Harrow straightened his tie and walked toward the glass doors. He moved like a man preparing for cameras, even though the only witnesses were his own employees. Grant Vale stood behind him, pale but composed, watching every step. The first officer, a heavy-set man with tired eyes, approached Solomon with professional courtesy. "Sir, we need you to come with us. You're being asked to leave this property." Solomon looked up slowly. Rain dripped from his gray hair onto his weathered hands. "I understand, officer. Can you tell me why you're here today?" the second officer asked, younger and more suspicious. Before Solomon could answer, Sterling pushed through the revolving doors with 2 security guards flanking him. He wore his most serious expression, the one he used for board meetings when contracts were at risk. "Officers, thank you for responding so quickly," Sterling said, raising his voice enough for employees to hear through the glass. "This man entered our building this morning claiming to be someone he's not. When we asked him to leave, he became aggressive and refused to cooperate." The first officer looked between Sterling's expensive suit and Solomon's worn clothes. "What exactly did he claim?" "He said he founded this company," Sterling said, letting a note of amazement creep into his voice. "Archer Meridian Technologies. Can you believe that? A man who clearly lives on the streets claiming he built a billion-dollar corporation." Behind the glass, employees pressed closer to watch. Amelia Rhodes stood near the reception desk, her face twisted with anguish. She held the incorporation document in her trembling hands, but she might as well have been holding air. Nobody would listen to her now. "Sir," the young officer said to Solomon, "is that what you told them?" Solomon's voice remained steady, almost gentle. "I told them I had business with this company's history. That much is true." "See?" Sterling said, spreading his hands like a reasonable man dealing with delusion. "He's confused, probably suffering from some kind of mental episode. He was carrying this old folder, insisting it contained company secrets." The officer looked at the leather folder Solomon still clutched. "Can we see what's inside, sir?" Solomon met the man's eyes. "Not here, not now. This evidence needs to be preserved properly." Sterling laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "Evidence? Officers, this man is clearly disturbed. He probably picked up some random papers from a dumpster and convinced himself they prove something." Grant Vale stepped outside then, moving like a man who owned the rain itself. He approached the officers with the measured authority of someone accustomed to being believed without question. "Gentlemen, I'm Grant Vale, chairman of the board," he said, his voice cutting through the storm. "This individual has been harassing our company for weeks, making phone calls, sending letters, claiming ownership of intellectual property that belongs to Archer Meridian." It was a lie, smooth and believable. Solomon had made no phone calls, sent no letters, but Grant delivered it with such conviction that even Amelia began to doubt what she had seen with her own eyes. "We've been patient," Grant continued, "but this morning he escalated. He entered our private lobby during a board meeting, disrupted our anniversary celebration, and refused to leave when asked politely." The first officer nodded, already reaching for his handcuffs. "All right, sir. We'll need you to come with us. No trouble, okay?" Solomon stood slowly, his movements careful and dignified, despite the rain soaking through his clothes. He looked at Sterling with something that might have been pity. "You should have asked who built your security system," Solomon said quietly. Sterling's confident smile flickered for just a moment. "What?" "The cameras, Sterling. The ones recording this conversation. You should have asked who designed them." Grant's face went white as bone. Behind the glass, Amelia watched Solomon extend his hands toward the handcuffs with the patience of a man who had been waiting 74 years for this moment. As the officer clicked the cuffs into place, Solomon turned his head toward the lobby windows. His eyes found Amelia through the rain and glass. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly despite the storm. "Remember the cameras?" he said, just loud enough for her to hear. "Remember the folder? And remember the old vault beneath the building." Then they placed him in the police car, and Solomon Archer disappeared into the rain like a ghost who had never been there at all. The rain hammered Sterling's office windows like bullets against glass. Inside, Archer Meridian's crisis team huddled around the polished conference table, their faces lit by laptop screens and the gray afternoon light. Sterling paced behind his chair, his expensive suit wrinkled from the morning's confrontation. "This is what we're dealing with," Sterling said, gesturing toward the window where Solomon had stood hours earlier. "A delusional old man who thinks he can shake down a Fortune 500 company by playing the victim card." Sarah Mitchell, the head of public relations, typed rapidly on her tablet. "We need a statement that portrays him as mentally unstable without crossing legal lines. Something that makes the public see him as desperate and dishonest." "Perfect," Sterling said. "What about the footage?" Tech Director Marcus Webb pulled up the lobby security feed on his laptop. "We've got everything from multiple angles. The problem is, it clearly shows you pushing him toward the doors." Grant Vale sat motionless at the far end of the table, his fingers steepled. His pale face showed no emotion, but his eyes never left the screen. "Edit it," Sterling said without hesitation. "Remove the push. Make it look like he stumbled on his own. Better yet, make it look like he lunged at me first." Webb's hands hesitated over the keyboard. "That's significant alteration of evidence. That's protecting the company from a fraudulent lawsuit," Sterling snapped. "Do it, and make sure the original file disappears completely." "What about the incorporation document the girl found?" Sarah asked. Grant finally spoke, his voice like ice cracking. "Amelia Rhodes accessed restricted archives without authorization. That's grounds for immediate termination. She was just doing her job," Webb protested weakly. "Her job is data entry, not investigating company founders," Grant said. "Fire her before she spreads more lies." Sterling nodded eagerly. "And clean out the anniversary exhibit. Remove anything about early minority contractors or disputed founders. We don't need to give crazy people ideas." 3 floors below, Amelia Rhodes sat at her desk in the records department, her hands shaking as she stared at the incorporation scan. The office buzzed with whispered conversations about the morning's incident. Most employees seemed to believe Sterling's version. A confused homeless man had tried to scam the company. But Amelia remembered Solomon's calm dignity. She remembered how he protected that leather folder like it contained precious treasure. And she remembered his words about the cameras and the vault. Her computer screen showed the original file path for Solomon's founder record. The document had been buried deep in legacy systems, tagged with a deletion order from 1979. Someone had tried to erase Solomon Archer from history, but they had missed one digital thread. Amelia's fingers moved quickly across the keyboard. She copied the file path, the metadata, and 3 related documents onto a small flash drive. Her heart pounded as footsteps approached from the elevator bank. Amelia Rhodes? Security Supervisor Janet Mills stood behind her cubicle with a cardboard box. "You need to come with me." "What's happening?" "Unauthorized access of restricted company records. You're terminated. Effective immediately." Amelia's co-workers stared as she packed her personal items into the box. Her coffee mug, a small plant, family photos. The flash drive slipped easily into her jacket pocket. "This is wrong," she said to Janet as they walked toward the elevator. "That man was telling the truth. That's not for you to decide," Janet replied coldly. 15 minutes later, Amelia stood outside Archer Meridian's glass entrance in the continuing rain. She pulled out her phone and looked at the edited news footage already spreading across social media. It showed Solomon approaching Sterling aggressively, stumbling toward the doors on his own, looking wild and threatening. The lie was already becoming the truth. Back in Sterling's office, Grant watched the news coverage with satisfaction. "Good work," he told the crisis team. "But this isn't over. The old man has something in that folder, something dangerous." Sterling loosened his tie, feeling confident for the first time since morning. "He's a crazy homeless guy with wet papers. What can he possibly do to us?" Grant's cold eyes reflected the gray light from the window. "He can remember things we thought were buried forever. He needs to be destroyed completely before the gala. Not discredited, destroyed." Solomon's key turned in the lock of his small apartment as the rain finally softened to a steady drizzle. The 2-bedroom unit sat on the 3rd floor of a converted brownstone, filled with the smell of old books and machine oil. His wet shoes squeaked against the hardwood floor as he stepped inside. "Grandpa?" Leona Archer rose from the kitchen table, her laptop open beside a stack of legal papers. At 39, she carried herself with the sharp confidence of someone who spent her days fighting powerful people in courtrooms. Her dark suit was perfectly pressed, her natural hair pulled back in a professional bun, but her brown eyes blazed with fury. "Why didn't you call me?" she demanded, before Solomon could even close the door. "I had to see you on the news like everyone else. Some edited garbage showing you stumbling around like an old fool?" Solomon set the leather folder carefully on the table and began unbuttoning his soaked work shirt. "That's exactly what I wanted them to think." Leona stared at him. "You wanted to be humiliated on television? Grandpa, they made you look crazy, dangerous. The comments under that video are disgusting." Solomon pulled a dry sweater from the hallway closet, his movements deliberate and calm. "Show me what they're saying." Leona spun her laptop around. The screen showed Sterling's official statement, complete with the edited security footage. In this version, Solomon appeared to lunge forward aggressively, while Sterling backed away in self-defense. The fall looked accidental, almost clumsy. 37 news outlets picked this up, Leona said, her voice tight with anger. "They're calling you a con artist, a mentally unstable vagrant who targets successful companies for fraud. There are already copycat stories about other fake founders trying to exploit anniversary celebrations." Solomon studied the screen without flinching. "Good. The more they lie now, the harder they fall later." "This isn't a game." Leona slammed the laptop shut. "Your reputation is being destroyed in real time. By tomorrow, no one will believe anything you say." Solomon sat down across from her and opened the leather folder. Inside, yellowed engineering schematics lay beneath protective plastic sheets. Patent applications covered in his careful handwriting. Blueprints for security systems that looked decades ahead of their time. And nestled in a small cloth pouch, a single brass key. "Your reputation only matters if you're asking people to believe you," Solomon said quietly. "I'm not asking anyone to believe anything. I'm going to show them proof they can't deny." Leona leaned forward, examining the documents. Her legal training kicked in immediately. "These patents, they're all filed under your name, from 1973 to 1976. But the company history says—" "The company history is a lie." Solomon's voice carried no bitterness, only cold fact. "Sterling Harrow thinks he kicked out a homeless man this morning. He has no idea he assaulted the person who designed the building he was standing in. Then why didn't you tell him? Why didn't you show him these documents?" Solomon's weathered hands touched the edge of a schematic. "Because Sterling is just the fool they put in front of the cameras. The real enemy is Grant Vail. He's the one who knows exactly who I am. He's the one who helped erase me 50 years ago." Leona studied her grandfather's face. She had always known him as a quiet man who fixed electronics in his spare time and never talked much about his past. Now she was seeing someone else entirely, someone who had been planning this confrontation for decades. "Grant Vail," she repeated. "The board chairman? His father was my business partner, Harold Vail. We started this company together, along with 2 other men." Solomon's fingers traced the brass key. "When I refused to let them use my security system for military surveillance in poor neighborhoods, they decided I was a problem. The warehouse fire in 1976 wasn't an accident. It was cover. Cover for what? Stealing my patents, forging buyout papers, erasing my name from every document that mattered." Solomon looked up at Leona. Harold Vail died in 1994, but his son inherited more than money. He inherited the lie, and he's spent 30 years protecting it. Leona's legal mind raced through implications: corporate fraud, patent theft, conspiracy. If Solomon could prove even half of what he was claiming, the damages would be enormous. "We need to file immediately," she said. "Emergency injunction, fraud complaint, civil rights violation. I can have papers ready by—" "No." Solomon's voice was firm. "Not yet. They expect us to rush into court angry and desperate. Instead, we're going to let them commit fresh crimes while trying to bury the old ones. Grandpa, every hour we wait gives them more time to destroy evidence." Solomon smiled for the first time since morning. "The evidence they need to destroy is already destroyed. What they don't know is that I have copies they never found, and the key to get more." He held up the brass key, letting it catch the kitchen light. "This opens something they thought was gone forever. But first, we need to find someone who can verify what's inside." "Who?" "Marjorie Ellison. She worked in the company archives from 1975 to 2010. She saw them bury my records after the fire. She stayed quiet to protect her job and her pension. Solomon's expression hardened. But she kept copies, hidden copies, and Grant Vale knows it. Leona grabbed a legal pad and started writing. Where do I find her? Before Grant does, Solomon said simply, because if he reaches her first, those copies disappear forever. The townhouse sat wedged between identical brick buildings on a narrow street that hadn't seen fresh paint in decades. Solomon and Leona climbed the cracked concrete steps as morning light struggled through heavy clouds. The small front yard held withered flower boxes and a rusted mailbox marked M. Ellison. Solomon pressed the doorbell twice. No answer. Leona knocked firmly on the wooden door. Mrs. Ellison, my name is Leona Archer. This is my grandfather, Solomon. They heard shuffling footsteps inside, then the sound of multiple locks turning. The door opened just wide enough to reveal a pale woman with gray hair pulled back tightly. Her eyes were sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses, and her mouth formed a thin line of suspicion. I don't want whatever you're selling, Marjorie said. We're not selling anything, Solomon replied quietly. We need to talk about Archer Meridian. Marjorie's face went white. She tried to close the door, but Leona placed her hand against the frame. Please, just 5 minutes. I don't know anything about that place anymore. I've been retired for 14 years. Marjorie's voice shook slightly. Whatever problems you think you have, I can't help. Solomon stepped closer to the door. The warehouse fire wasn't an accident, Marjorie. You know that. You were there. The older woman's hands trembled on the door handle. I don't know what you're talking about. October 15th, 1976. Building 7 caught fire during the night shift. Electrical malfunction, they said, but the sprinkler system had been shut off 3 hours earlier. Solomon's voice remained calm and factual. You were working late in the archive room when the alarm started. You saw them carrying boxes out of the building before the fire department arrived. Stop. Marjorie's word came out as a whisper. I carried Tommy Rodriguez out of that building with burns on his hands, Sarah Williams with smoke in her lungs, 3 other people who couldn't make it to the exits fast enough. Solomon's eyes never left Marjorie's face. While I was saving lives, Harold Vale and his partners were stealing patents from the damaged files and replacing them with forgeries. Tears started running down Marjorie's cheeks. I needed my job. My husband had been laid off. My children needed... I know, Solomon said gently. I'm not here to blame you for staying quiet. I'm here because Grant Vale is trying to destroy me again. And this time, he won't stop with just me. Leona watched the exchange, seeing how her grandfather's patience was breaking through decades of fear. This wasn't the angry confrontation she had expected. It was something much more powerful. Marjorie stepped back from the door, leaving it open. Come inside, but I can't promise you anything. The small living room was neat but worn, filled with old furniture and faded photographs. Marjorie sat heavily in a reclining chair while Solomon and Leona took the couch. They made me destroy everything, Marjorie began, her voice barely audible. After the fire, Grant's father came to the archive with 2 lawyers and a security guard. He said the damaged files were contaminated and had to be eliminated for insurance purposes. But you kept copies, Leona said. Marjorie nodded slowly. Microfilm. I had been copying important documents for months before the fire, just as backup. When they ordered the destruction, I hid the microfilm cartridges. Where? Solomon asked. They forced you out because you wouldn't sign over the surveillance patent, Marjorie continued, ignoring the question. Harold Vale wanted to sell your security system to the military. They were talking about using it in housing projects, monitoring people who couldn't fight back. Solomon's jaw tightened. I built those systems to protect communities, not spy on them. You said no, so they decided you were expendable. Marjorie stood up shakily and walked toward a corner sewing cabinet. Harold Vale told everyone you had sold your shares and left voluntarily. But I saw the real documents. I saw how they forged your signature. She pulled a small key from her pocket and unlocked the bottom drawer of the cabinet. Inside, beneath fabric and sewing supplies, was a rusted tin box about the size of a shoebox. 50 years I've kept this secret, Marjorie said, lifting the tin carefully. 50 years I've been afraid they would find out and take away my pension. She walked back to the couch and placed the tin in Leona's hands. The metal was cold and heavy. Everything's in there. The original incorporation papers with your grandfather's name. board meeting minutes where they planned his removal, patent transfer documents showing the theft, and photographs of the forged buyout agreement they used to steal his ownership. Leona's fingers traced the edges of the tin. "Why now? Why are you willing to help us now?" Marjorie sat back down, looking older than her 66 years. "Because yesterday Grant Vail called me for the first time in 14 years. He asked if I remembered anything about old founder records. He asked if I had ever seen Solomon Archer's name in any documents." Her voice became stronger, steadier. "He's scared. And if Grant Vail is scared after all these years, that means Solomon finally has a chance to win." Marjorie opened a locked sewing cabinet and gave Leona a rusted tin of hidden records. Later that day, Leona sat in her downtown law office, surrounded by copies of documents from Marjorie's tin box. The microfilm records were clearer than she had hoped. Every page told the same story. Solomon Archer had been systematically erased from his own company. She picked up her phone and dialed the courthouse. "This is Attorney Leona Archer. I need to file an emergency motion for corporate board review under Delaware corporate fraud statutes." The clerk's voice was tired. "Ma'am, emergency motions require documented evidence of ongoing fraud, witness testimony, and immediate threat to shareholder interests." Leona finished. "I have all three." 2 hours later, she stood outside Archer Meridian Technologies as news vans pulled up to the curb. The emergency filing had become public record, and reporters were already calling it the most explosive corporate fraud case of the year. Inside the boardroom, Grant Vail sat at the head of a polished conference table, watching Sterling pace like a caged animal. 7 other board members filled the remaining chairs, their faces showing everything from confusion to anger. "This is insane," Sterling shouted, throwing a copy of Leona's filing onto the table. "Some old fraud shows up with fake documents, and we're supposed to halt a billion-dollar contract?" Board member Patricia Clemens, a sharp woman in her 50s, looked up from reading the motion. "These aren't just any documents, Sterling. If these incorporation records are authentic, Solomon Archer has a legitimate founder's claim." "The records are 50 years old," Sterling snapped. "Even if they're real, he signed them away." "Where's the buyout agreement?" asked another director. Grant finally spoke, his voice calm and measured. "The original documents are in the founder's vault. We can settle this matter quickly by examining the physical evidence." Solomon entered the boardroom 30 minutes later, accompanied by Leona and carrying the brass key. He moved slowly, deliberately, as every person in the room stared at him. The old man who had been kicked into the rain now commanded the attention of executives worth hundreds of millions of dollars. "Mr. Archer," Grant said, standing politely, "thank you for joining us. I understand you believe you have a claim to this company's founding history." Solomon placed the brass key on the conference table. The small piece of metal looked insignificant under the bright lights, but it made several board members lean forward. "I don't believe anything," Solomon said quietly. "I know what I built, and I know what was stolen." Sterling's face was red with anger. "You can't just walk in here with some old key and expect—" "The key opens the founder's lockbox," Solomon interrupted, his voice steady. "Inside the mechanical vault beneath this building. The same vault I designed in 1973 to protect the company's most sensitive documents." Patricia Clemens looked at Grant. "You never mentioned a founder's vault." Grant's expression didn't change. "The old security systems were decommissioned years ago. I'm not even sure the vault is accessible anymore." "It's accessible," Solomon said. "The combination is built into the building's original blueprints. The key fits a lock that can't be picked or drilled, and the contents will show exactly how I was removed from this company." The room fell silent. Sterling stopped pacing, and several directors exchanged glances. "Very well," Grant said after a long pause. "We'll examine the vault contents tomorrow morning. The board will make its determination based on the physical evidence." Outside, reporters pressed against the glass doors as Solomon walked through the lobby. For the first time in 50 years, he moved through the building like he belonged there. Employees whispered as he passed, and security guards stepped aside respectfully. But in the basement, maintenance workers were already connecting high-pressure hoses to the building's water system, following orders Grant had given hours earlier. That night, a maintenance crew enters the basement under Grant's orders, and water begins flooding the old vault before Solomon can reach it. The next morning arrived gray and bitter, with rain streaking the floor-to-ceiling windows of Archer Meridian's top-floor conference room. Solomon sat at the polished table wearing his best dark suit, the brass key placed carefully in front of him. Leona had arranged her files with military precision, each document marked and ready. Across the table, Sterling fidgeted in his expensive chair, while Grant remained perfectly still, watching everything with cold calculation. The full board had assembled for the review. Patricia Clemens sat with a legal pad, taking notes. Two other directors looked uncomfortable, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. Amelia Rhodes had been allowed to attend as a witness, though security guards stood by the doors like she might bolt. Marjorie Ellison clutched a worn purse in her lap, her hand shaking slightly. "Let's begin," Grant announced, his voice cutting through the tension. "Ms. Archer, please present your client's case." Leona stood, her movement sharp and confident. She placed the first document on the conference table's projector screen. This is the original incorporation filing from 1973, listing Solomon Archer as the primary founder and patent holder for Archer Meridian Technologies. The document filled the wall screen, showing Solomon's name clearly at the top. Several board members murmured, and Sterling's jaw tightened. "This document was discovered in the company's own archives," Leona continued. "It proves Mr. Archer founded this company and invented the security systems that built your fortune." She moved to the next exhibit. Here are the original patent applications filed under Solomon Archer's name in 1972 and 1973. The breakthrough building security network that became the foundation of every system this company has sold for 50 years. Sterling couldn't stay quiet. "Anyone can forge old papers. Where's the real proof?" Leona smiled coldly. "The real proof is in the founder's vault, which Mr. Archer designed specifically to prevent document forgery. The brass key opens a lockbox that contains the original partnership agreements, financial records, and board minutes showing exactly how he was removed." Marjorie cleared her throat nervously. "I can confirm the vault's existence. I helped archive sensitive documents there in the 1970s, before the warehouse fire." Grant's expression didn't change, but his fingers drummed once against the table. "Unfortunately, there's been a complication with the vault." He pressed a button on his phone. "Send in the maintenance report." A facilities manager entered, carrying a thick folder and looking apologetic. "The founder's vault suffered catastrophic flooding last night. A main water line burst directly above the storage area. Everything inside was destroyed. The room erupted." Leona shot to her feet. "That's convenient timing." "These things happen in old buildings," Grant said smoothly. "The vault system was nearly 50 years old. Metal fatigue, aging pipes. We're lucky the flooding didn't spread to other areas." Solomon sat quietly, studying Grant's face. The older man was good, but not perfect. His eyes showed just a flicker of satisfaction. "However," Grant continued, "we do have some historical documentation that might resolve this matter." He opened a leather portfolio and removed a yellowed document. "This is a notarized buyout agreement dated December 15, 1976. It shows Solomon Archer voluntarily selling all founder rights, patents, and future claims to Archer Meridian Technologies for the sum of $1. The paper appeared authentic, complete with official seals and witness signature. Grant placed it on the projector, and the contract filled the wall screen. Solomon's signature was clearly visible at the bottom. "As you can see," Grant said, "Mr. Archer legally transferred all ownership to his partners 37 years ago. His current claim has no merit." Sterling's smirk returned. He leaned back in his chair like a man who had just won the lottery. "So much for the great founder conspiracy." Leona grabbed the document, examining it under the conference room's bright lights. Her face went pale as she traced the signature with her finger. The handwriting looked right, the paper felt old, and the notary's seal appeared genuine. Patricia Clemens frowned. If Mr. Archer signed away his rights in 1976, why is he pursuing this claim now? "Desperation," Sterling said bluntly. "Old man sees a successful company with his name on it and thinks he can cash in. Probably needs money for medical bills or nursing home costs." "That's enough," Grant said quietly, but Solomon could see he was enjoying Sterling's cruelty. The board voted quickly, 7-1 against Solomon's claim, with only Patricia Clemens abstaining. The buyout agreement was accepted as authentic. The flooded vault was declared an unfortunate accident. Amelia's termination was upheld for unauthorized access to company records. Marjorie faced potential legal action for interfering with corporate operations. Furthermore, Grant announced, Mr. Archer is hereby served with a restraining order. He is barred from Archer Meridian property and prohibited from contacting employees, directors, or business partners regarding his fraudulent claims. Security guards moved toward Solomon, but he stood calmly and walked to the elevator without assistance. Leona gathered her files in stunned silence. The brass key remained on the conference table, now worthless. Outside, the rain had intensified. Solomon sat at the same bus stop where he had waited 3 days earlier, before entering the building that bore his name. His shoulders were soaked again, and his carefully pressed suit was already wrinkled from the weather. Leona joined him under the small shelter, her briefcase clutched against her chest. "Grandpa, I'm so sorry. The buyout looked real. The signatures, the dates, everything." Solomon pulled the document from his coat pocket, studying it carefully under the dim streetlight. Rain spotted the yellowed paper as he held it closer to his eyes. "It is real," he said quietly. "Real forgery. Professional work, except for one small mistake." He pointed to the signature line where his full name was written in careful script. Solomon Theodore Archer. "They spelled my middle name right," Solomon said, a small smile crossing his weathered face. "But I never used my full middle name on legal documents. Theodore was misspelled on my birth certificate as Theodore. Every legal paper I ever signed used the wrong spelling, because that's what my ID showed." At the rainy bus stop outside the building, Solomon studies the forged signature and notices his middle name is written incorrectly. The bus ride to Mount Zion Baptist Church took 20 minutes through the storm-darkened streets. Solomon sat quietly beside Leona, the forged document folded in his coat pocket. He stared out the rain-streaked window at the old neighborhood, where Archer Meridian Technologies had first been born. "Why are we going to church, Grandpa?" Leona asked as they stepped off the bus in front of the modest brick building. "Because that's where it all started," Solomon said, walking toward the side entrance. "Before the glass towers and marble lobbies, we built the first security system in that basement." The church looked tired but dignified, its red brick walls darkened by decades of city rain. A small sign read, "Mount Zion Baptist Church, Esther 1952. Solomon knocked on the heavy wooden door, and an elderly black man in coveralls answered. "Solomon Archer," the man said with a wide smile. "Been expecting you for about 30 years. Hello, Deacon Williams. This is my granddaughter, Leona." Deacon Williams led them through narrow hallways lined with old photographs of church events and community meetings. The basement stairs creaked under their feet as they descended into a large room filled with folding chairs and storage boxes. "Right back here," Deacon Williams said, pointing to a corner where concrete blocks formed a small raised platform. "Just like you left it." Solomon knelt beside the platform and pulled the brass key from his pocket. He pressed against one of the blocks until it shifted, revealing a hidden space underneath. The key fit perfectly into a small metal box wedged between the foundation beams. "You knew Grant would use the forged buyout," Leona said as Solomon worked the lock. "I counted on it," Solomon replied. "Been waiting 40 years for him to make that paper official. Once he used it in a legal proceeding, he turned old fraud into fresh crime." The lockbox opened with a soft click. Inside were dozens of microfilm rolls, carefully wrapped in plastic and labeled by date. Solomon handed them to Leona one by one. "Original patents, 1974, 1976. Board meeting minutes, payroll records showing my salary as chief engineer, and this." He pulled out a manila envelope containing a thick legal document. The cover read, "Archer Meridian Technologies, Founder Agreement, Sealed Copy." Leona opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the dense legal text. "This says you retained permanent voting rights if the company ever engaged in fraud, discrimination, or military misuse of your security patents. Every kicked-out founder needs insurance," Solomon said. "I wrote that clause myself after my partners started talking about government contracts I didn't like. And you've been saving this for 50 years? Saving it for the right moment, when they'd be arrogant enough to think I was beaten." Deacon Williams chuckled from across the room. "Your grandfather played chess while other folks played checkers, always thinking 3 moves ahead. Leona continued reading, flipping through pages of technical specifications and legal clauses. Her eyes widened as she reached the final section. "Grandpa, there's something else here. Something about property ownership." Solomon nodded grimly. "Keep reading. This is a land trust document. It says the Archer Family Trust owns the property beneath the current headquarters building." She looked up, stunned. "You still own the land?" "Bought it in 1973, before we incorporated. Put it in a family trust to protect it from business debts. The company pays symbolic rent under a 99-year lease." "How much rent?" $1 per year, same amount they claim I sold my founder rights for." Leona's hands trembled as she found the lease termination clause. "It says here that the lease automatically ends if the company denies your founder status or commits fraud connected to your patents." Solomon stood slowly, his knees stiff from kneeling on the concrete floor. "By kicking me out of the lobby, lying about me publicly, and using that forged buyout in a legal proceeding, Sterling and Grant triggered every termination clause I wrote." The implications hit Leona like lightning. "They don't just owe you recognition as founder. They're about to lose the building." "Now you're starting to understand the game," Solomon said quietly. Deacon Williams whistled low. "Lord have mercy. You really been planning this since Carter was president." Leona carefully returned the documents to the lockbox, her mind racing through legal possibilities. The headquarters lease is under immediate challenge. The board's fraud review can be reopened with this evidence. And if you still own voting rights, then I can call for new leadership, Solomon finished. Remove Sterling as CEO. Replace Grant as chairman. All perfectly legal under the founder agreement they never knew existed. She found one final document at the bottom of the box, a property deed showing that Solomon's family trust still owned the land beneath Archer Meridian headquarters. That same evening, Solomon sat at Leona's dining table, while rain drummed against the windows of her downtown apartment. The microfilm documents were spread across the polished wood surface like weapons being prepared for battle. Amelia Rhodes sat across from him, still shaken from being fired that morning. Marjorie Ellison occupied the chair nearest the wall, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Read the termination clause again," Solomon said quietly. Leona found the relevant section in the land trust document and cleared her throat. "The lease for the property beneath Archer Meridian Technologies headquarters shall terminate immediately if the lessee company engages in fraud, denies the founder status of Solomon Archer, or misuses the patented security systems for surveillance against vulnerable populations." "They hit all 3 violations in one day," Amelia said, her voice filled with wonder. "Sterling denied your founder status publicly. Grant used a forged document in the board review, and the federal contract they're signing tomorrow uses your security patents for citywide surveillance." Marjorie spoke for the first time since arriving. "When we destroyed the old archives, Grant's father told us we were protecting the company from frivolous claims. He never said Solomon had ironclad legal protections we couldn't touch." Solomon's weathered hands traced the edges of the founder agreement. "They thought kicking an old black man into the rain was just another Tuesday. They didn't know I spent 40 years making sure their arrogance would cost them everything." Leona opened her laptop and began typing rapidly. "I'm filing emergency preservation orders tonight. Federal court needs to freeze all company assets, board decisions, and contract signings until this fraud investigation is complete." "What about the anniversary gala?" Amelia asked. "Sterling's announcing the billion-dollar federal deal tomorrow night. Hundreds of people will be there." "Perfect," Solomon said with grim satisfaction. "Let him have his stage. Grandpa, we could stop the event entirely. Get injunctions. Force them to postpone." "No." Solomon's voice carried absolute authority. "Sterling needs an audience for what's coming. He needs donors, cameras, federal officers, and every employee who watched him kick me into the rain." Leona paused her typing. "You want him to announce the contract publicly? I want him to celebrate using my patents while denying I exist. I want Grant standing beside him, knowing exactly what they stole. I want it recorded, broadcast, and witnessed by everyone who matters." Marjorie leaned forward, her guilt-ridden face showing the first hint of hope she'd felt in decades. "What happens when they realize the documents are real?" Then the building they're celebrating in gets pulled out from under them, Solomon replied, along with their jobs, their reputations, and their freedom. Amelia pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. I know 3 other employees Sterling fired for asking questions about company history. They'll want to be there tomorrow night. Good, Leona said, returning to her laptop. I'm contacting Federal Contract Officer Elaine Mercer right now. She oversees the Smart City deal, and she needs to know about the patent fraud before Sterling gets those signatures. Solomon stood and walked to the window, watching rain streak down the glass. The city lights blurred into soft halos of yellow and white. Somewhere across town, Sterling and Grant were probably toasting their victory, believing they'd buried Solomon's claim forever. They spent 50 years thinking they were untouchable, he said without turning around. Tomorrow night, they learn what happens when you steal from a man who builds things to last. The federal officers will be at the gala, Marjorie asked nervously. They'll be everywhere, Leona confirmed, still typing. Document experts, fraud investigators, and contract enforcement. Sterling thinks he's throwing a celebration. We're turning it into an arrest party. Solomon finally turned back to the table, his calm eyes meeting each of their faces. Remember, they kicked an old man into the rain because they thought he was powerless. Tomorrow, they discover he owns the ground they're standing on, and the patents they're selling, Amelia added, with growing confidence. And the legal authority to fire them all, Leona finished. Solomon nodded slowly. Don't stop the gala. Sterling needs a stage large enough for his own downfall. The Archer Meridian headquarters atrium gleamed under crystal chandeliers, transformed into a celebration worthy of kings. 500 guests filled the soaring glass space where Solomon had been kicked into the rain just days earlier. Donors in $1,000 suits mingled with federal officials, corporate executives, and local politicians. Television cameras captured every angle as servers moved through the crowd with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Sterling Harrow stood near the main stage in his perfectly tailored navy suit, his silver hair catching the lights as he shook hands and posed for photos. Tonight would crown him as Archer Meridian's great modern leader. The federal Smart City contract would make him the CEO who brought the company into the future, leaving behind whatever messy history had tried to surface earlier in the week. Magnificent turnout, said Mayor Patricia Wells, raising her glass toward Sterling. You should be proud of what you've built here. 50 years of innovation, Sterling replied smoothly. We're not just celebrating the past tonight. We're announcing the future. Across the atrium, Board Chairman Grant Vail positioned himself near the exit doors, his pale eyes scanning the crowd with barely concealed unease. He'd heard whispers about legal filings, emergency motions, and federal investigators asking questions about document authenticity. But the lawyers assured him everything was handled. Solomon's claim had been dismissed. The forged buyout was accepted by the board. The old man was legally barred from the property. Still, Grant's fingers drummed nervously against his champagne glass. The main entrance doors opened, and security guards immediately stepped forward as 4 figures approached. Solomon Archer entered wearing a tailored charcoal suit that transformed him from the rain-soaked vagrant Sterling remembered into a man of quiet dignity. His granddaughter Leona walked beside him in a sharp black dress, carrying a leather briefcase. Behind them came Amelia Rhodes, no longer the nervous analyst who'd been fired, and Marjorie Ellison, the retired archivist who'd spent decades carrying guilt. Sir, you're not permitted on these premises, the lead security guard said, blocking Solomon's path. We have a restraining order. Let me handle this. Sterling's voice cut through the elegant chatter as he approached with several executives trailing behind him. The crowd began to notice the commotion, conversations quieting as people turned to watch. Sterling's confident smile never wavered as he faced Solomon in front of hundreds of witnesses. Gentlemen, this is exactly what I warned you about. Some people can't accept reality when it doesn't match their fantasies. The cameras followed Sterling's movement, capturing every word as he gestured toward Solomon with theatrical concern. This building belongs to people who earned their place here through hard work, innovation, and legitimate business practices, not to confused old men who wander in from the street with impossible stories. Federal Contract Officer Elaine Mercer stepped closer, her sharp eyes moving between Sterling and Solomon. She'd received urgent calls about document fraud, but seeing the actual confrontation made everything feel uncomfortably real. "Mr. Harrow," she said carefully, "perhaps we should address these allegations privately before—" "There are no allegations," Sterling interrupted, his voice carrying across the silent atrium. "Only the desperate lies of a man who thinks he can steal from successful people because it's raining and he needs somewhere warm to sleep." The cruel dismissal landed exactly as Solomon expected it would. Cameras recorded Sterling's words. Federal officials heard his contempt. Employees who'd watched the lobby assault saw him repeat the same arrogant performance on an even bigger stage. Solomon stood perfectly still, letting Sterling's cruelty echo through the glass space. Then he calmly raised one hand. At the signal, Leona opened her briefcase and sent the first file to the gala's presentation system. The screens behind Sterling flickered once, then changed completely. The celebration footage vanished. Instead, crystal-clear security video filled every display in the atrium. The crowd watched Sterling circle Solomon in the lobby 3 days earlier, his voice sharp and dismissive, as he ordered the old man to use the service entrance. Then came the shove toward the revolving doors, followed by the vicious kick that sent Solomon stumbling into the rain. The silence was absolute. Sterling spun toward the screens, his confident smile cracking. "Turn that off! Someone's hacked our system!" But Leona was already uploading the next file. Documents appeared on every screen. The original incorporation scan showing Solomon Archer as Archer Meridian's first founder. Patent applications bearing his signature from 1974. Board minutes describing his revolutionary security network design. Engineering schematics drawn in his careful handwriting. "Ladies and gentlemen," Leona's voice carried clearly through the wireless microphone she'd activated, "meet Solomon Archer, the man who built the company whose 50th anniversary you're celebrating tonight." Federal Contract Officer Elaine Mercer stepped forward, her phone already pressed to her ear. "I need document preservation teams here immediately, and fraud investigators." Sterling lunged toward the presentation booth, but 2 federal marshals moved to block his path. "Sir, you need to step back from the equipment. This is now evidence in a federal investigation." The screens continued cycling through Solomon's records. The forged 1976 buyout appeared, followed by a forensic analysis highlighting the misspelled middle name that proved the signature was fake. Then came the devastating land trust documents, showing Solomon's family owned the ground beneath their feet. Grant Vail pushed through the crowd toward the exit, his face gray with panic. But FBI agent Sarah Kim intercepted him at the doors, badge visible as she gestured for his briefcase. "Mr. Vail, we have questions about document destruction, fraud, and corporate conspiracy. You're not leaving until we examine your files." Marjorie Ellison stepped forward, her voice shaking but determined. "I was the company archivist for 37 years. I watched them erase Solomon's name after the warehouse fire. I saved the microfilm records because I knew someday the truth would matter." The screens showed her preserved documents, payroll records proving Solomon's employment through 1976, board votes removing his founder status, and correspondence between Grant's father and company lawyers discussing concerns about a black founder holding power within the company's executive structure. Amelia appeared at Leona's side with 6 former Archer Meridian employees, all carrying folders. "These are complaint records the company buried," she announced. "Discrimination reports from black workers, age harassment complaints from older staff, retaliation cases against anyone who questioned management. The company didn't just erase Solomon, they erased everyone who looked like him or supported him." Sterling's face had gone from confident to desperate. "This is all fake. Doctored evidence from criminals trying to steal?" "Enough." Judge Elizabeth Morrison's voice cut through the chaos as she entered with court officers. "Mr. Harrow, you're being removed as CEO pending federal investigation. Mr. Vail, you're under arrest for document fraud and conspiracy." Security guards who'd once protected Sterling now stepped back as federal agents moved forward. The cameras that were supposed to capture his triumph instead recorded his disgrace as he was escorted away from the stage. Solomon walked calmly toward the podium Sterling had abandoned, his footsteps echoing in the silent atrium. The morning after the gala, Archer Meridian Technologies looked like a crime scene wrapped in corporate polish. Gone were the anniversary banners and celebration displays. Instead, FBI evidence teams wheeled boxes of documents through the marble lobby while reporters pressed against the glass doors, their cameras flashing like strobe lights in the gray dawn. Solomon stood near the reception desk, watching federal agents catalog files that should have carried his name for 50 years. The young receptionist who'd dismissed him 3 days earlier now couldn't meet his eyes as she directed investigators toward the executive floors. "Mr. Archer," Federal Contract Officer Elaine Mercer approached with a tablet and a grim expression. "I wanted to inform you personally, the billion-dollar Smart City contract has been frozen pending investigation. Any company involved in fraud, discrimination, and forged ownership documents cannot receive federal funding." Solomon nodded slowly. "How long will the investigation take?" "Months, possibly years. Your patents are being reviewed to determine what technology was developed under false ownership claims. If we find government contracts were secured using stolen intellectual property, the financial penalties will be severe." Through the lobby windows, Solomon watched Sterling Harrow emerge from a black sedan surrounded by lawyers. The man who'd kicked him into the rain now faced criminal charges for assault, discrimination, document fraud, and conspiracy. His confident swagger had been replaced by the hunched shoulders of someone whose world had collapsed overnight. "The board called an emergency meeting," Mercer continued. "They're voting on immediate leadership changes and company restructuring. Your granddaughter is inside presenting the transition plan." Solomon walked toward the elevator bank, passing employees who whispered his name with a mixture of awe and shame. Some had watched him fall in the rain without speaking up. Others had known fragments of the company's buried history, but chosen silence over conscience. The elevator doors opened to reveal Amelia Rhodes wearing a new security badge labeled Senior Records Director. Her promotion had been announced that morning, along with her reinstatement. "The basement vault has been pumped dry," she reported as they rode toward the executive floor. "We found fragments of your original documents in waterproof cases. Grant Vail thought flooding would destroy everything, but some files survived." "Grant always underestimated preparation," Solomon replied quietly. The boardroom buzzed with tension as Solomon entered. Leona stood at the presentation screen, addressing 12 directors who looked uncomfortable in their expensive suits. Marjorie Ellison sat at the witness table, no longer the frightened retiree, but a key figure in the company's reckoning. "The compensation fund will total $18 million, Leona announced, covering every employee who faced discrimination, retaliation, or wrongful termination connected to concealing Solomon Archer's founder status. This includes workers fired for supporting minority contractors, asking questions about company history, or reporting harassment." Director Patricia Walsh raised her hand nervously. "What about the company name? Archer Meridian has brand recognition worth hundreds of millions." "The name stays," Leona replied firmly, "but the company will be restructured as Archer Meridian Foundation Systems, with my grandfather's founder status permanently restored. The mission returns to his original vision, building security technology that protects communities instead of exploiting them." Through the conference room windows, Solomon watched court officers escort Grant Vail from his Mercedes into a federal courthouse across the street. The man who'd orchestrated his erasure now faced decades in prison for conspiracy, fraud, and civil rights violations. Marjorie's voice trembled as she addressed the board. "I kept those microfilm records for 47 years because I knew this day would come. Solomon Archer saved lives in that warehouse fire while his partners stole his patents. The least this company can do is restore his dignity." The vote was unanimous. Solomon Archer was officially recognized as Archer Meridian's original founder, with his name restored to all corporate documents, building plaques, and historical records. That afternoon, construction workers installed a bronze plaque near the revolving doors where Solomon had fallen. The inscription read, "Solomon Archer, original founder. A building has no worth if it only protects the powerful." 3 weeks later, rain hammered the glass lobby as Solomon stepped through the entrance in a tailored charcoal suit. Employees stood respectfully as he passed, no longer seeing an old man in wet clothes, but the inventor who'd built their foundation. Water streamed down the windows, but Solomon remained completely dry beneath the restored dignity of his name. He paused at the bronze plaque, touching the metal surface briefly, then walked toward the boardroom where his first meeting as recognized founder would begin. The man who'd been kicked into the rain had finally come home. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.